It's a lot easier to checkmate your opponent's king with two bishops than a bishop and a knight, because in this example with two bishops, white controls both the light squares and the dark squares. But when you have a knight and a bishop, then depending on which color your bishop is, for example if it's a light square bishop, then you have to force your opponent's king to either the A8 or the H1 squares. And if you have a dark square bishop, then it's the A1 or the H8 squares. But when you have two bishops, that's not actually a problem, because you already control both squares. So let's just take a look. This was the starting position here of the bishop f5 check. The black king goes to c4, and obviously this can start from any position. And again, if you already know that two bishop is winning and a bishop and a knight is winning, then it doesn't matter where or how you start the position on the board, because it's a win anyway. So bishop e3, and again you're simply giving your opponent's king fewer and fewer squares or room to maneuver. So again you're sort of pushing him back, boxing him in, and that's exactly what is going on here. But there's also a little pattern to this. If we go all the way back here after bishop f5, king c4, bishop e3, king c3, it's sort of the king moves every second move basically. So king b4, bishop d2, the black king moves, and now the white king moves. And if we imagine a little square, the square is getting smaller and smaller all the time, and eventually the enemy king is getting checkmated. So king a3, king c4, king a4, bishop c2 check, king a3, bishop c1 check, king a2, and now the square is very small. Bishop e4, obviously the bishop has to go back. King a1, king c3, so the bishop can either come from here and then down here or something. It depends on the circumstances. King c2, king a1, bishop b2 check, king a2, and now bishop d5 check, mate. So what to say about these moves? Again, if we start off from here, you can see compared to yesterday's example, it's a lot easier with two bishops, and you're simply minimizing the square for the king. Basically here the square is quite big, but then it's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller all the time, and eventually it's just checkmate. And let's take another look at just any random position on the board where the same thing happens, where the black king or your opponent's king is getting fewer and fewer squares to move. Okay, this is another example where the position looks a little bit different. I mean, this time it looks like black actually has a chance. I mean, he's way up here, and white is down here. But again, it doesn't matter. We already know that it's a win, and you just give your opponent fewer and fewer squares, and you're pushing back all the way up to the 8th rank, and that's exactly what is happening here. So after bishop g2, king e5, and slowly but maturely we start marching up with the king, and already the square that the black king has is getting smaller and smaller. Now compare this after just 7 moves with this. That's kind of interesting how fast things happen, but that's the way it is. That's how simple it is to checkmate with two bishops. And I mean, I'm not sure. When I talk about endgames, I'm not so sure what to talk about actually. I mean, the move speaks for themselves. Why bishop f7? Well, for the simple reason that the black king cannot come back, and the king has to go somewhere, so the only square is c8, and now bishop e7. Why bishop e7? Well, exactly the same reason as bishop f7. So now the king only has 2 squares, king b8, king b6. Why king b6? Well, obviously, if not king b6, the king can escape to a6. Not that he's saving himself, but it's still a square. So king b6, the king goes back just a little bit. Another check, check, checkmate. So if we go all the way back to the beginning, we started with bishop g2. Obviously, this could start with a move like king e2, king d2. I mean, you can start virtually with any move, and it doesn't really matter. So this is just an example. And we can see the pattern that the king is getting fewer and fewer squares, and so the square around the king is getting smaller and smaller. So that's exactly what is going on. You just box it in and then checkmate. And there's not really much else to say about these endgames. I did say that the two bishops is a lot easier to checkmate your opponent's king with than a bishop and a knight. So it does make more sense to study endgames that are much harder to win. And I believe that the bishop and the knight endgame is trickier than, for example, two bishops. The next endgame will be with a rook, and that's very simple, obviously, because that's what we'll see. So the rook ending. Here white has a rook against a king, and for a beginner this might look like far away from a win, but you will again see, if you imagine that square we talked about when we had two bishops, and this time we only have a rook, so the black king obviously has a greater problem, so to speak. So let's just start with move rook e2. Why rook e2? Well, if we go back, this time the black king obviously has the square is a lot bigger, but when we go to rook e2, the square is getting immediately smaller. So in order to extend, to go as far to the corner as he possibly can, he goes down to d4. So this is the corner of his square, so to speak. And now king c2. The king has to move, and obviously he doesn't want to go back, so he goes to c4. That's still within his square, even though now he cannot go back to. He was over here, so either he goes to this square or this square. If he goes back, then the square is getting smaller. So king c4 kind of keeps it a little bit bigger, but now rook d2. And the square is again smaller, because now if we go back here, we go all the way back, rook e2. Now this is the square, so to speak. But after rook d2, this is the square. And that's one way to look at it, and that's actually the way I choose to look at it. And now king b4, obviously the black king is still okay. The rook cannot come to c2, and that will make just this square. So now it's even small. Still he has this square, the black king. So king b4, and now king d3, king c5, king c3. Notice that if the white king had just given a check over here or something, then the black king would have escaped over here. Not that it loses, of course, or it draws. Of course, black is completely lost, but you want to be as efficient as possible. King c3, king d5, rook d5 check, king c6, king c4. So you notice the square is just very small, just 9 squares. King d6, same thing, rook d6. Obviously if the black king goes over here, then rook a6, king a4, and now rook a6 checkmate. So that doesn't work, so obviously he has to go to c7, king c5, king d7, rook c6. And it is a little bit different, obviously, when the king is just a few moves from getting checkmated. So you move up the king, rook c6, stopping the king from coming to either c8 or c7. King e7, rook c7 check, king a8, king c6, or king b5, doesn't really matter. King b8, and now king b6, king a8, and just rook c8. So again, a quick look. Rook e2, and this big square that the black king had is no longer available after rook e2. So now the square is immediately much smaller. So that's basically what you do. You just give your opponent's king a smaller and smaller square for each move. Okay, that was just an example. So king c7, king c5, and just checkmate. If king a5, no, not king a5, I think it was another move I was looking at. Let's see. Okay, if the king goes here, then we can just go up here, and the king has to go somewhere. I mean, obviously he can't go to the right, so he has to go down at exactly the same thing, checkmate. So for that reason, you have to play king a8 just to delay that. And if I said that king b5 was also okay, king b5, then the king goes here, the king goes there, checkmate. So I hope you enjoy this trick, different, well, actually 2 bishop endgames and this rook endgame, and I hope you learned something.